Welcome back to the show, everyone. Sam and I sat down today to talk with Olympic rower and early Bored Ape Yacht Club investor, Stuart Sim. He shared many insightful stories about what it takes to be an Olympic athlete. Stuart tells us about his rigorous training schedule, his mental fortitude, and what the Tokyo 2020 Olympic atmosphere was like. We'd really appreciate it if you guys left a review on Spotify for us. With that being said, let's get into it.
All right, welcome to the show, Stuart.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we're just gonna get right into it. So for the viewers, as you heard, Stuart's a rower, and so how did you come upon rowing? And especially since a lot of the kids are focusing on like larger sports like soccer, basketball, and baseball.
Yeah, so now as I start talking, and depending on what the intro says, you can probably figure out by now that I'm Australian. So the good thing is we don't have to compete with American football out of the gate because there's no American football in Australia. But for me, I started my rowing career as a coxswain. So I'm the guy that sits in the boat, really the eight. So there's 8 rowers and there's the coxswain. And I started at high school. In Australia, the high school sports system's like very big, so you don't have to like go to a club or depending on how schools work here in the US. But funnily enough, and you have to do 2 sports. So you have to do a summer sport and you have to do a winter sport. And rowing was one of the options as a summer sport at my school. Both my dad and my grandfather both went to the same high school that I went to, and they were both coxswains in the varsity 8, which won like the big race, back in 1941 and 1978. So yeah, I'm a 3rd generation coxswain. So yeah, I remember my dad kind of was very good about it. Wasn't too forceful in saying, hey, which sport should I do as my summer sport? But I think he was pretty excited to walk me down to the boathouse, even before I could kind of officially choose rowing as my summer sport to try to get me into boats. And yeah, my school was pretty good at rowing as well. So so I graduated high school in 2011. So yeah, 11 years ago. And they had just won their first national championship in, probably 10 or 20 years in 2008. So that was right as I was trying to get onto the varsity team. So yeah, I knew I wanted to be in a good sport, and they were a pretty successful team. And yeah, it didn't help to have 2 generations of people ahead of me in the sport.
I was about to say, yeah, that must be nice, like having 2 family members that already done it and they clearly were successful in it, so they can literally tell you all the tips that they learned.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what is like, so obviously like rowing, like the people who row is pretty straightforward, but what is like the role of a coxswain in rowing? I'm not familiar at all, like with what their job is. So could you just like explain that?
Yeah. So the way I think about it is coxing, or being a coxswain, is to be the coach in the boat. So the primary responsibility is steering, but most rowing races are just 2,000 meters in a straight line. But when you've got 4 guys, rowing on each side, the boat is actually, pretty challenging to steer kind of straight, especially when an Olympic medal, the difference between getting a medal or no medal might be 0.1 of a second over a 5.5-minute race. You definitely don't want to steer kind of sideways, trying to go in a straight line. But it's trying to be the coach in the boat. So what that means is kind of understanding how we're trying to row and communicating that with the guys who are actually rowing. So I'll be wearing a microphone, and that microphone is run into a speaker system. So I can just talk like I'm talking to you guys. I don't have to yell, although you see kind of some rowing videos of coxswains yelling like stroke, or row harder. There's a bit of that, but it's mostly talking to the guys, and trying to make sure as they're going for 5.5 minutes at 180 beats per minute, max out pain, trying to keep them in rhythm, in time, technically together. Like we're talking at rowing, at a race, you're probably doing about 40 strokes per minute. So you should sit down on a rowing machine if you've got one at a gym and try to row at 40 strokes a minute. And I've got to get 8 guys rowing 40 strokes per minute in time in the same way when they're at 180 plus beats per minute in a race. So that's one part of it, technical, and then a lot of it is kind of race strategy. So we'll have a bit of a race plan figured out before the race, how we want to approach it. That said, at the Olympics, you're pretty much going max out for 2,000 meters. Like there's no time to like settle into a stride. It's just max. But we do have like key technical points or key little pushes in the race. And it's kind of my job to kind of stick with the plan and say, hey, at the 1,000-meter mark, we said we were going to do this for 10 strokes. But I might have to make the call in the race and go, hey, guys, I know it's the 950-meter mark, but I think we can win the race here. Let's go now. So it's a bit of race strategy. And then the last little bit of it all is kind of motivation. So especially during training, which I'll know we'll cover in a second, keeping the guys engaged, keeping them wanting to push themselves very hard for extended periods of time through training is just mentally exhausting for everyone. So if there's some way that I can bring energy, bring positivity, get these guys excited to row, keep them excited to row, or help them through, when they're upset and angry, then that's kind of falls onto me. So yeah, a lot of motivation, a lot of coaching, which is kind of funny because I've probably rowed myself maybe 15 times in my whole life, and on the Olympic team we're rowing 15 times a week. So it's kind of funny where it's like I'm telling people, I'm 5'8.5", and I'm telling 6'5" guys who are 100 pounds heavier than me, how to do something that I've never done.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. 40 strokes per minute for an entire race. I cannot imagine. You mentioned when you were in high school, I think you said like you have to do a summer and winter sport. Is that like everyone has to do that in Australia?
For the school system that I was a part of, there's like a collection of 10 schools. So I went to like a private school, and the private schools in kind of the big cities like Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane generally have a similar system where there'll be 10 to 15 schools kind of in a competition or whatever, and they'll agree that, hey, the summer sports are rowing, cricket, athletics, tennis, lawn bowls, stuff like that. I'm sure I'm missing some sports. And then the winter sports are like basketball, soccer, Australian football, rugby, things like that. So yeah, pretty much if you look at the like 10 to 20 private schools in the big cities of 2 to 5 million Australians, those are our biggest cities. The private schools kind of run that system.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's not like that over here in America. It's just like if you want to join, then you better be good enough to join the team. If not, you're getting cut. And I personally experienced that, and I guess he has too. Yeah. So they don't like give you a free spot, unfortunately.
I think we could definitely benefit from something like that, though.
Yeah, definitely
more kids active.
Yeah, that goes to like a question that I came. So obviously there's like all these sports, and like there's obviously a physical side of sports, and then there's like the mental side of sports, which is clearly what you prioritize like yourself in. So like, what was like, did you have like experience, or like did you know like, okay, like I'm really smart, like did you have previous experience in like mental and like mindset things before you became is it a coxswain?
Coxswain. So it's
coxswain.
spelled,
Okay.
yeah, or a cox for sure.
So like why'd you choose like the mental side, like the motivational like coaching side of sports compared to like just training and whatnot? Like what appealed to you so much about that?
Yeah, part of it was I was small. Like to be a coxswain, even at the Olympics, they've got a minimum weight, which is also then a kind of theoretical maximum weight, and that's essentially like 120 pounds. So when I was kind of in high school, because I was on the smaller side. Yeah, that and rowing was kind of appealing. That's how I ended up becoming a coxswain, because I was, gosh, in high school, I was, I'm trying to think of how small I was, but I was pretty small. So it was just naturally going to be really challenging for me to be a competitive rower at like 5'8". And obviously in high school, I would have been a lot shorter. So that was one part of it. And then I think what was interesting is, even though it is more mental, I was extremely competitive and already into sports kind of before I started rowing. So I was always playing tennis, pretty decent at cross country, cricket, field hockey. Field hockey was my winter sport, and I was on the varsity team for that. And so I just viewed it, I didn't view it then as, this isn't an opportunity for me to work out or get physically strong. When the guys would be doing training on their rowing machine, I'm going on a 7-mile run or a 10-mile run to, show that I'm also an athlete, and that I'm not just kind of jumping in the boat and, speaking to the guys. Part of it also is a bit of like core strength. Like if you get in one of these boats, you've got, 8 210-pound guys, picking up this boat essentially, obviously with an oar, but you kind of lift the boat when you're taking a rowing stroke out of the water, and then like it gets put back in the water and you kind of lift it up again. The good teams don't really pick it up and put it down too much, but it does like happen. So as a coxswain, kind of like an F1 driver, like if you guys watch F1, these guys do so much physical training to sit in a car, and you just think, oh, they're sitting, are these guys athletes? And it's like, hell yeah. Like obviously F1, the G forces are way higher than they are for coxswain and rowing, but it's a bit of that. But honestly, I get where you're kind of talking about the question, but I just viewed myself as an athlete, and I was like, okay, this is just how I'm going to choose to compete. But to lean into your question, it was kind of funny where I went to the University of Washington, which you guys might have seen this book called Boys in the Boat, which is actually being made into a movie. And what was kind of cool, it was about the 1936 UW crew, which went to represent the US at the Berlin Olympics and won a gold medal in front of Hitler and the Germans, against like all odds, being just, a bunch of poor kids from Seattle, or Washington, I should say. But the cool thing was, a bunch of coxswains have also been through the University of Washington business school. Like we were all business undergrads. So if you look through some of like the key eras of UW coxswains, a lot of us varsity championship winning coxswains were also business undergrads. So there is this like strategy and gamesmanship, the data. Like we've got these little machines at the bottom of our feet in the boat, which show all of this data about speed and the physics of the boat. So that's really exciting to me, where it's like, okay, I've got to assess all this data, look at all the wind, look at how the guys are rowing, and I've got to quickly come up with decisions on what I say that's going to get the best benefit out of everyone. So there's a lot of like kind of gamesmanship in going, okay, do I go negative or do I go positive? Do I pick on this one guy, or do I talk about the whole crew? Do I talk about the conditions? Do I talk about other boats, or do I talk about our boat? So I think that's the kind of like mental jockeying, or kind of, hurdles and gymnastics that probably, to your question, go to that point, go to that side of things, where it's fun strategy to figure out, is what we're doing good? How do we go faster?
Right. Yeah. You touched on a lot there. So like, I'm curious, like, so when you started, obviously it takes, like, if you're an Olympian, like you're the highest level athlete, like in the world, there's no question about that. Like that's just the common thing that everyone knows. So like, obviously you touched on how you were a cross country runner, which I think is even more like, I think it's one of the most like mental, like mindset, like things that you can do as a sport, because like in other sports, it's like there's a goal or there's a net and you're like, okay, I just got to do whatever I can to get in this net. And it's really simple. But like when you're running, it's like, okay, if you got to train and you're training whatever for long distance, you literally just have to keep running and you can't stop and you have to push yourself. And it's literally a mental battle, like against yourself. I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins, but he's like super, like it's literally just all a mental game and you just have to push your body. I mean, he's an awesome guy. I'm sure you're familiar with him, but I'm curious, like when you were growing up, obviously you had your family members that had the previous rowing, but was it like, what was the role, if it was them or someone else? Like, did you have a mentor in your life that like pushed you to like be to that next level instead of just like doing this for fun in high school? Like where was the step up? Like, was there someone in your life that was like, okay, listen, like you're really good at this, I want to like push you and get better? Like how was that relationship with someone?
Yeah, I think there wasn't a specific person, and what I would say it was the culture of the team that I joined, and that was that, hey, this program can and has shown that it can win a national championship. And I joined the program even kind of as an underclassman, trying to like break into the varsity, and like saw them win a national championship, and they just kind of set the tone of saying, hey, this is what it takes to win. And so I had great belief in the coach and the coaches that were knew that we could get there, and then the rowers in the boat, because of the way the program was set up. Yeah, like I could come in as essentially a freshman, and they really needed kind of coxswains because so many people wanted to be part of the rowing team. Like we had 200 kids in a grade level, and 100 of them wanted to row. So they need like 10 coxswains. So they need to find 10 people who are, sub 120 pounds and whatever, willing to, do this as their sport. So I was able to get in early and then be a part of that kind of national championship winning team, although not directly. But yeah, what I saw there and how they pushed was then as I got, older into the program, kind of understood what it would take again to like win a high school national championship. And then I left I left Australia to come to the University of Washington to join their rowing team. They were also national champions at essentially the NCAA Div 1 national champions. They don't have it in rowing. It's called the IRAs, but it's essentially the NCAA Div 1. And again, in that environment, it was like these guys are winners. Their approach to training was almost bigger than kind of like one specific person. That said, again, to answer your question, really good coach in high school that I believed in. And then because I was young, the guys in my boat, so I was maybe 13 or 14, but the average rower in my boat was a senior who was like 18. So the first stroke man, so the guy who sits directly in front of me in my first year on the varsity team was already, kind of in the national championship mix. So he was a great kind of teacher where he was talking through the stroke like a lot. And in those first couple of seasons, I honestly didn't do a lot of coxing because he was so good in his position that I could kind of do a lot of learning, and I didn't have to try to like fix issues and solve the boat. So yeah, I would say generally it was like team culture over like one, I'm thinking of Karate Kid where you've got Mr. Miyagi. So yeah, more of a team than an individual, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's really important for being on a team with older people that they like if they're welcoming and they encourage you and motivate you. Whereas if they like bully you because you're younger, that can really motivate you to stop training and leave the sport. But so seeing as you were training so difficult at two national championship schools in high school and college, I'm curious, like what was your training schedule like? And perhaps, and you mentioned at Washington there were so many other rowers in your program. Like, did you study with them, or did you guys like train and study together?
Yeah. So in high school, during our season, so it was the summer season, we would train a ridiculous amount. It was like 14 times per week. So that was generally like 1 hour on the rowing machine in the morning, and then weights at lunch. So the guys, everyone else is, eating in the cafeteria, chatting about whatever they were doing on the weekend, and we were in the gym, and then we would actually row in the afternoon, and we would essentially do that like 3 times a week, plus 1 or 2 other lunchtime sessions, and then plus like a 2-a-day training on a Saturday. So yeah, pretty heavy training load, and that was almost more than what we did at the University of Washington, because when you join a NCAA sport, they have a restriction saying that you can only do 20 hours of training with the team. So I think that works out to be, I can't remember the exact kind of sessions, but we would generally row 6 days a week from when we get to school, in like first day of class, let's say September 25th. And then we've got a spring racing season. So our big race is, let's say, June 1st. So we would only do racing in like the 6 weeks up to that June 1st date. So it was a lot of training without a lot of racing. And for that, we would train, 20 hours a week, which was the max that we were allowed to. That's generally, Monday through Saturday. You're pretty much rowing each day. And then on every other day, or like right after the row, you would do a gym session or a rowing machine session. So that was like pretty funny, where one of my favorite memories of like the University of Washington is where as soon as practice starts, that clock for the 20 hours a week starts. And so everyone is like running everywhere. They're running into the shell house, like grabbing oars, running down onto the dock, putting the oars on the dock, running back up, get the boat, like walk the boat fast onto the water, go do the session. You get off, so you've just rowed for 90 minutes, and then it's like, okay, we've now got 3 minutes to get to the gym. So everyone's like running oars back, get the boat up, then they run to the gym, and then they do like a 45-minute gym sesh. So yeah, about 6 days a week, 20 hours a week for pretty much the majority of the season, except during exams, when like sports go into this like 8-hour weeks, is considered a light week, is 8 hours of training. And then on the Olympic team, it's maybe 10, 15 hours more. But there's no running because there's no restrictions. If we wanted to row for 40 or 50 hours, in theory, we could.
Yeah, that's super motivational, I feel like, because like if there's all these people that are trying to like practice rowing, and like if you surround yourself with a group of people that are all achieving the same goal, like it makes you personally like motivated to do it even more, because you see all these people hustling and they're like, oh, we got to get the hours. And then you're like, okay, well, I got to be better than this coxswain, because he might be working harder than me, and then it's just like this all competition thing, which is just a beautiful thing about sports. I'm curious, like, obviously in your like specific role as a rower, are there like different, did you have to do like certain exercises for like communication, or like social like exercises that like taught you how to communicate with these rowers? Or like was it more just like a thing that they just were like, okay, you're going to practice when you get out there?
Yeah, good question. I think what we would do as coxswains on the UW team, we were a really good like unit. And again, there were maybe 6 or 7 coxswains maybe on the varsity team, and there were only 3 or 4 racing boats, and everyone kind of wants to be in the varsity. But we were really good at reviewing each other's race recordings. So we would bring out a phone or like a recorder of some sorts, and whether it was in training or a race, we would record the race, and then during the next practice, we would review each other's race plans. And that would be just something like, oh, I like this of what you did, or why did you do this? So I think that's some part of it. Then a second part of it is having rowers who can just communicate of what they like and don't like. Like, this isn't just, I've got my style now that I was in the sport for 12 or 14 years. And that does matter, because I can come back to, or I can get in a crew, and if I don't have some kind of personal relationship with the guys in the crew, or they just don't like my style because I'm too kind of free flowing, whereas another cox might be like really scripted and analytical. Or one cox might be only motivational and have really bad technical, but maybe they've got a really technical crew, so they just want motivation. So the lesson there is kind of understanding what my strengths were, and I wasn't necessarily trying to outcompete other coxswains on their strengths. I would kind of acknowledge my weaknesses and try to work in those areas, but then double, triple down into my strengths, because that's what was going to get me to the big level, because you can't pretend to be kind of someone else when you're trying to make like the top boat. But I guess part of my point is that maybe in another program, I might not have been the best cox, or even at UW, if the guys who I had in the varsity 8 ended up being in the JV, and some guys in the JV were in the varsity, and they were kind of voting on who they wanted as the cox, maybe they wouldn't have picked me. So it's a weird little personal mix. But so we did a lot of reviews as coxswains, and then yeah, we did do a lot of reading in terms of like kind of sports books. So there's two that stick to mind that we read as a coxswain group, and one was called Legacy, which is a really good book on the New Zealand All Black rugby team, the All Blacks. And that's like one of the winningest sports teams of all times, where they won for something like 14 years. So just like reading books like that. The other one was called The Inner Game of Tennis, which I know is super popular. And that's essentially, a lot about mindset. Grit by Angela Duckworth, I know, is another book. So yeah, we're trying to like read these books, learn these like tactics of like how to bring people together, how to build teams, because that was a big part of our role.
Yeah, so I'm curious, because I guess you're like a leader at the highest competitive stage. So what are perhaps some tips for our viewers for how to be a better leader that you might have learned over the years?
Yeah, the first thing is don't try to be the leader. I think the people, and there's a quote somewhere which I find to be true, where it's like the best leaders end up leading because they see no other choice or something, not because it was ego driven or because you try to be a leader. And what happened with my journey was I was trying to be a really good coxswain first. And as I made better decisions, as I got the guys in my boat to consistently be faster, they perceived me, or they would just kind of listen to me or want to work with me. And I had to make a lot of the decisions because I was the one with the microphone. So you can't have 8 guys yelling in the boat. So at the end of the day, somebody has to, make the calls. But in a lot of boats, the coxswain isn't quote unquote the leader or the team captain. It's probably like football, where it's like, hey, the quarterback, more often than not is probably the captain or the leader. But there can often be very strong other players on the field who end up kind of like fulfilling that role. So I think that's one part of it, is like, to be able to be a leader, you've got to show confidence, and confidence comes from competence. So if you're good at what you're doing without bringing a lot of ego into it, I think that's something that I was like very good at, is in rowing, especially at the Olympic level, and even at UW, which is a phenomenal program. Like US college rowing would be very competitive at the Olympics, because you've got a lot of international rowers who want to get an education, and no other country has a college rowing system. So it's either you go to the national team or you quit rowing. So part of that is, what was I saying before that? something about competence.
Yeah, and like hiding your, like making sure that your
Oh
ego
yeah,
is,
ego. Yeah, that's it.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm dealing with guys, especially on the Olympics, some of which are already Olympians. They're generally much older than I was. And I had to build trust with them and show them that I was just competent at making decisions for them to trust me. And then ultimately they're kind of happy to, well, uh, yeah, I wouldn't even say happy to have me as a leader, like
I think
just as a
trust is a good
decision
word.
maker, but it's
I think,
trust. Yeah.
yeah, trust is a great word to summarize it. That reminds me of a book that you were sharing some books with us, so I'll share some books and maybe you might gain something out of them.
Yeah.
Jocko Willink, he's a Navy
Yeah.
SEAL. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
His book Extreme Ownership. Have you read that?
Yeah. I haven't read it, but I've heard it's great and get
Yeah,
love the premises.
It's a wonderful book, and it's all about like leadership and how when you're a leader, you have to take your ego out of it. And like if you're going to be the leader and you're going to be facilitating, quote unquote, like all these people, and if someone messes up in the team, you can't think like, oh, this is the dude's fault for messing up in the team. The whole book is based about like, okay, if you're a leader, you have to take ownership of everything. And if someone makes a mistake out there, then maybe it's not because that they did something wrong. Maybe it's because you communicated something wrong to them. And that's like the whole sort of like lesson of the book. And he talks about like stories in war, and then he relates it to like business stories as well. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it. I'm sure you already know, you've heard it, but it's definitely worth the read.
Yeah, totally love that idea of extreme ownership. Like there's a fun saying, which is part of why I hate coxing, which is at the end of the day, you can get a boat with 8 rowers across the line, probably without a coxswain. But you can't get a boat to be competitive with 7 rowers and a coxswain. Like that's never going to beat 8 rowers. So there's this idea of like when you're coxing, if you win, you get none of the reward, and if you lose, it kind of gets blamed on you because you didn't fix the rowers. And I think that was like a really interesting lesson to kind of learn early on, which I think took a lot of my really helped craft my humility. Because yeah, if we lost races or weren't training well at practice, I was never, oh my God, it's this guy, we've got to get him out of the boat. Or I wish they were just faster, give me better people. It was like, okay, did I do everything in that session that put these guys in the best chance for them to succeed? And how can I look at myself first? And yeah, just like taking ownership with that being part, like it was always we, wasn't you. It was like, we need to do this. And that's why I did take a lot of kind of pride in me working out, or, at college or whatever, if somebody wasn't doing something that if somebody did something they weren't supposed to do and the team had like a punishment and had to do a 1-hour session on the rowing machine as punishment, then I would also jump on the rowing machine. Even though I don't, do the training, I was like, okay, now I've got to figure out, I've never done, more than 40 minutes on a rowing machine. And now the team's getting a 1-hour punishment on the rowing machine. Okay, I'm going to sit down and I've got to figure out how to do this for an hour now. So I think that's the little things that kind of help craft that.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you were mentioning boat and like leaders, that also reminded me of another story that was in the Extreme Ownership book. And they were doing a exercise, and they had like 5 groups, and they were carrying this boat. There was like groups of 6 Navy SEALs, and there was one leader, like a designated leader, and they were carrying these boats out to like the harbors or whatever, buoys out in the end, and then they had to come back, and like the fastest team won, quote unquote. And what they did was they took the winning team's leader and they moved it to another boat, and the new boat without the team, like the losing boat, they took the leader of the winning boat to the losing boat, and the losing boat ended up winning. And that same boat that the leader was on also was doing like good, and they were staying up in path. So it shows that like leadership even carries over like into like past them leaving, and it's a whole team effort.
Yeah, totally. I think that comes to like competence. What we would do at UW is every Monday in the winter, when it's like 32 degrees and cold and windy, we would do a 2K, 2,000 meter race. And we would do random lineups. So we would literally pick people's names out of the hat and say, this is one boat, and you pick out more names out of the hats. And a compliment that I got was that whatever random boat got picked, like if I was the coxswain of that boat, people really felt like they had a chance to win. And I built this kind of brand at UW because I had won the national championships there, and I even nearly went to the Olympics in like midway through my college career. And then I came back as this guy that kind of was on the national team and nearly went. And people believed in me almost more than I felt like I actually deserved or was. But that was kind of cool because then I would get in a boat and everyone's like, oh damn, you know, they've got Stuart coxing, so they're probably the favorites, you know. And that was, so I totally believe that there is this kind of mental gymnastics that people play when they're like, okay, you know, in Jocko's book, where it's like, oh, this guy was the leader of the winning boat, great, now he's with us, now we can win. So I believe in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm curious also, when you were a college student and you said you're rowing 20 hours a week and you're pursuing a business degree, did you have any time to like socialize or build any relationships outside of that, or was that literally all you had time for?
Yeah, that's a fun one. I like this question. So it depends on the school, but I'll talk about how it worked kind of at UW. So we did train Monday through Saturday, and my approach to like classes and schoolwork, and it is a bit of a cliche, but the coaches do say, hey, we are student athletes. Student comes before athlete. If you're not doing well, like if you're actively not doing well in classes, like you don't have to be the best, but if you're not trying, if you're not doing your homework, if you're not doing assignments, if you're rude in the classroom or trying to say, hey, I'm on the crew team, so I had crew practice, that's why I'm late, you're not on the team. Like you're not going to be on the team for long. So yeah, like you got to put in good time in the classroom and do your assignments and all that. But there is this like mythical triangle that people kind of talk about, where on the 3 points you've got being on the crew team, being academic, and then having a social life. And it's like, pick two. You can't have crew team athletics and crew team academics and social life. So look, we would kind of have the guys who were over 21 would definitely have a bit of a party on Saturday nights, mostly just with the rowing team. Like these were pretty lame parties, honestly. But we didn't do things for the most part, like, you know, drinking on weeknights at, you know, UW doesn't have a huge Greek system, so that would have been interesting. Like none of us were in a frat. Like if you were in a frat, we're just not good enough. Like you just couldn't commit. There were too many conflicting commitments. And then people are not really going to other parties, or, you know, like Wells Wednesdays. I don't know if that's like still a thing, like amongst colleges, where it's like dollar drinks at the college bars and pubs. Like we didn't really do that stuff. So you definitely do have to kind of, I didn't think of it as a sacrifice, because I was like, hey, look, my goal is to be a national champion and ultimately be an Olympian. And I'm going to have plenty of years to, you know, party and have a social life outside of it. But yeah, the cool thing is, like, if you've got good bonds and good friendships on the team, like it is kind of your social life. So it's like, okay, do I want to hang out with people who just don't get my lifestyle and don't value the same things that I value? I don't know. Like, it's fine. They're good people, I'm sure, but I just don't need to spend a lot of time and energy towards that. But yeah, it's really nice to kind of like not be rowing now, and I can actually like go on hikes and go skiing and all of this stuff that I just like go to really nice bars and restaurants through Seattle, go to breweries and stuff that I just didn't do on the crew team. So yeah, it was definitely a commitment and definitely not the social life that people would probably envy or think of when they think of college.
Right. Yeah. But I feel like if you really want to be like the best and like to the stage you got on to be an Olympian or even like really successful in like entrepreneurship, like we've had people on the show and like they literally talked about like how they built up this business, but they literally had no time for anything else. And it's like, if you really want to be the best at something, you have to prioritize it. And if like you're getting distracted by little things and you don't really want it and that bad, then you're not going to get there. And I feel like there's a big part of like you have to make sure that like if you want to be the best at something, you have to really put your whole life towards it, or else you're gonna get out competed against.
Yeah, totally agree. So yeah, that's why you've just got to be like really sure of your reasons. Like if you don't want to be an Olympian or win a national championship, like yeah, I could probably name 10 kind of okay rowing, US college rowing programs where they go out to parties on like Tuesday and Thursday night, and then they come, 20th or 25th at the national championships. And for them, that's awesome.
Yeah.
For me, that wouldn't have been awesome.
Yeah, and it is awesome that you're an Olympian. So I'm curious, like now to actually get into the Olympian story, but I feel like people like it's so important like to understand the story before you're an Olympian, because that's really what makes you an Olympian. It's not the fact that you just are an Olympian, like all these stories and like all the work that you put in before, that's really what turns you into an Olympian. But I'm curious, like what is like the process to become an Olympian, like for rowing or like a coxswain in your example? Is it like a team like tryout or something, or like how does that work?
Yeah, it was it's kind of interesting. So the way it worked for me, especially, this was kind of interesting. So I did 3 years at college, then I actually moved back to Australia to try to compete at the Rio Olympics. And what that meant was, back at the time, the way Australia rowing worked was you could train in whatever city you wanted, and then they would have like national trials in, let's say, March. And from there, they select essentially the squad that then will kind of train and ultimately compete at the Olympics. And in some cases, what's really funny is generally teams and countries will qualify for the Olympics the year before, but they qualify the boat and not the athlete. So let's say you qualify for the Olympics in 2015. A lot of on rowing, you qualify the boat class itself, not the people in the boat. So you and I might go and compete in 2015. We win the World Championships, which is the qualifier for the Olympics. And the rowing team goes, great, thanks very much. Try out for your spot again next year. And if you're good enough then maybe you'll go to the Olympics. So yeah, in the year before the Olympics, okay, so there's like, you think of it in like a 4-year cycle, there's 3 years of world championships, with the last year being the qualifier for the Olympics, and you've got the Olympics in the 4th year. So for me at UW, the first time, or for Rio, I just kind of took a year off school. I moved back to Australia, and that was just purely my choice. I was like, hey, I want to go to the Olympics. I just know I have to be in Australia, and I have to be now kind of around the club rowing scene and try to get in boats so that I can then be on the radar at nationals, and then get invited to be on the team. And so ended up making the team, and then we hadn't actually qualified in 2015. So we then needed to go qualify, and there were like 2 countries left to qualify. And we came 4th, so we didn't qualify, didn't go to the Olympics. So I then went back to UW, did 1 more season, and ended up then kind of finishing rowing and saying, hey, I've got a job now in Seattle. And I just started working. And then my coach, I was also part of some like under 23 or underage national teams while I was at UW, and that coach essentially became one of the Olympic or the coaches for the Tokyo Olympic cycle for the men's eight. So I'd already coxed a bunch of his boats. So in kind of 2019, he was saying, hey, you should come back and train with the team, because now for this cycle, which some national teams do, they invite every year like 20 rowers or so to train in the same city and be coached by the actual national team coach. So there's like a national training center. So yeah, it was pretty funny where I got kind of asked to come back, and I hadn't really been coxing at all since 2017. It's now 2019. So I was 20 pounds overweight. So I had to lose, I was like 145 pounds. So I was like, okay, I've got to lose 25 pounds now as a pretty small guy. And then pretty much flew back to Australia, and then turned up to the training center for a kind of tryouts camp where they generally don't row the eight, which is the only boat that a coxswain is in. There's like a small person boat with two rowers called the pair, then there's a four, and then there's an eight. But I can only be part of the eight. And they wanted to row 2 8s, so they needed another coxswain to be in the mix, and they kind of invited me to go back. So it was kind of being around the team then. But what was like really funny was one of the coaches there like didn't even know what I was doing there. And I remember I was talking to him one day. I've been back in Australia for like a couple of days, and I had quit my job to move back to try to go to the Tokyo Olympics. And I'm talking to one of the coaches, and it was like right before Christmas. So I was like, oh, this is cool. So you're here, you're gonna go home for Christmas down in Melbourne, and then like you're gonna go work again. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you said you're working in Seattle. I'm assuming you're going back after this training camp and Christmas. And I was like, no, I'm trying to go to the Olympics, dude. Like, have the coaches not talked to each other? And I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on here? Because I wasn't a part of the training center. And it was like, I didn't have the invite to be a part of that kind of system, because it's just a bit more complicated. But the funny thing was, I just made myself a part of that training center. So when I arrived in December of 2019, I just signed a lease in a house, and I said, I'm living 5 minutes away from the training center, and I'm just going to turn up every day to the training center. And I hope they're going to let me in the doors. I can't imagine they're going to lock me out. And if they use me, they use me. And if not, well, I'm there, and I'll go on a run, and I'm going to be there when they put the boats on the water, and I'm going to go on a run, and then I'm going to be there when the boats are off the water. Then we're going to hang out, and then they're going to go rowing again, and I'm going to go in the weights room and do some core or whatever. So it was a lot of kind of that, which was kind of funny. Like, I didn't really officially get invited, and I was just kind of part of the team, and just trying to get in boats every now and then. And they're like, oh, Stu's here. Let's jump in the eight today. Cool. Like, great that you're here. Let's go. Did that a couple of times. And then there's nationals. So they essentially had the current, or the coxswain who had done it for the last 3 years, because I did it 2016. And then this other coxswain came in once I went back to UW, and they did it for 2017, 2018, 2019. And then they had me compete with them at trials, where we just kind of race. And what they'll do is, for coxswains or rowers, will generally like literally do a race piece, and then they'll pull over to the side, and then they'll switch one rower or one coxswain, and then they'll do another race piece, and then they'll go, oh, okay, the first piece, they went 6 minutes, and the other boat went 6 minutes and 3 seconds. So there's a 3-second difference. Then they'll switch one person, and then the first boat goes 6 minutes and 1 second, and the second boat goes 6 minutes and 2 seconds. So you go, okay, there's now 1 second difference. So the person who was switched into the boat that still came second is actually faster than the first person. So that's a like pretty common ways to like test that. So they did that kind of. And then they also have because coxing is so subjective, like it's not like a rowing machine where you can go, okay, put on 2,000 meters, just you on the rowing machine and row as fast as you can, or how much can you deadlift, or all of this stuff. It's very subjective. So there's like a criteria for 20 different things, and the guys essentially ranked the coxswains on that criteria, and then they looked at that versus the water results, and then ended up selecting me for the 2020 Olympics, which turned out to be the 2021 Olympics. So
yeah, that's awesome. So like for like being an Olympian, I'm curious, like there's like the parade and whatnot. I guess 2020 was different because it was actually done in 2022 because of COVID. Obviously, we all know about that. But I'm curious, like, what the relationship is between like the players, because like obviously there's like this competitive atmosphere like in all sports, and it's like, okay, if this dude is on the other team, I don't know, this is how it is for me personally. Like if someone's on the other team, I'm like, okay, you're not my friend. Like I don't care who you are. Like I'm gonna try to win as bad as I can. What is like the relationship? Is it like more friendly, like between, even if it's like different like sports, or like what's the relationship between people? I guess it wasn't the same since it was a COVID year, but
yeah, I'd say at high school and college, I was like almost had a visceral hatred of other teams. And I was like, I don't care like who you are, like where, like I'm with my team, and I don't want like, and I don't want to talk to you. I'm not going to say hi. I'm not going to be rude, or I'm not going to be a dick about it, but I'm also not going to be like super friendly. And yeah, you shake hands after the race, whether you win or lose, and you're good, but you're not kind of too friendly. And I had some guys from my high school also come to different US colleges. So it was kind of funny seeing them at regattas and being like, hey, good job. How are things? I catch you later. On the Olympic team, or the national team, it's probably more friendly because rowing is really a very big part of your life. And you'll generally do it for a pretty long time. So the average medalist at the Olympics for rowing is generally a 2-time Olympian. So that means you're probably competing at the top level for at least 8 years. So that's a long time to, and then you've got an international racing season, which is about 3 or 4 races, maybe 5 a year. And it's just against the same countries. Like the top rowing countries are like very similar, like depending on the boat class, but it's like Germany, the UK, USA, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands. So there's only like 60 competitive, like really competitive rowers. And if they're all trying to be really good at the Olympics, they're probably in it for 8 years. So you probably race them 4 or 5 times a year and have, a pretty good relationship. So I'd say there are some, it's reasonably friendly. I think there are some people on each of the teams, like on the US team, obviously, because I went to college here, and the UK team, and the whatever Germans or Dutch. Like I've got good friendships with 2 or 3 guys on each of those teams. And then there are also like probably 2 or 3 people that people like really hate on each of those teams. So, but yeah, Tokyo was super weird because we were getting COVID tested every day. And if you had a negative test at the Olympics, you're done, and chances are your boat is done. So it was really bizarre where I hadn't seen some of my friends who rowed at UW with me for 5 years. And then the next time I see them is at the Olympics. And it's like, how cool is this? Like, we made it. Remember where we were 5 years ago? Oh my gosh. And then you're also like, you're in a mask and you're wearing like gloves in the dining hall, and you're just like, hi, standing a couple feet away. And it's like, but how cool is this? But you're like, but don't touch me. And should we talk? Like, can we talk for like 15, 20 minutes? And then they're like, oh, well, if my team sees me, they're going to be upset because, whatever, we might get COVID. So that was a weird kind of, and a bit of a shame that there is that. But I think then in a traditional Olympics, where it's Olympics are 2 weeks and rowing's a week 1 sport, I think that's a great bonding moment is the second week where everyone's still at the Olympic Village and the racing's been done, and then everyone's hanging out with all the other rowers and trying, get along. So, long story short, at the Olympic level, pretty good relationships. Everyone is like, at the end of the day, everyone's kind of doing the same training. Like, there's no secrets to it. So it's like, okay, we all know we're training hard. We know you're training hard. So there's no need to be a dick about it. So it's like, yeah, get out there and race. Obviously, everyone hates losing. Yeah. But more or less, everyone's pretty good, and there are definitely some good friendships across the teams.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've always been curious of what like the Olympic Village environment is like. So I gotta know, are you looking to qualify or already in the steps to qualify for the 2024 Olympics?
I probably won't. Yeah, it was just a really interesting campaign, and I think I'm just at the point of my life where I'm excited about other things. Like I said, I was in the business school, and then I worked at a startup coming right out of school, and it was like, cool, I'm now managing, as a 22, 23-year-old college kid, I'm now managing a team of 10, raising millions of dollars. Like my team is anywhere, like I was the youngest person in the company, and like my team was ranging anywhere from like 30-year-olds to like 55-year-olds, and I was like their boss and making like cool business decisions, and like trying to build a business, and that was like really fun for me. And as fun as coxing is, it's like, at the end of the day, like rowing or swimming or cross country, like these sports are like very, very boring or I shouldn't say boring. They're weirdly simple. Where at the end of the day, rowing, it's like we go out there and we try to row, 20 kilometers. We're just trying to go from A to B in this best way possible. And the blueprint is kind of simple. It's like, we need to be doing this, this, and this. And we should be able to be competitive at the Olympics. And for me, that's just not super, super exciting for me when I can join a startup and try to create this new company out of nothing and take an industry by storm. So, and to your point earlier, Sam, about like the social life, yeah, it's like I've put in a lot of time into rowing. So I'm enjoying, like I said, being an athlete in other ways. So doing a lot of skiing, running, weightlifting. I've got a lot of personal athletic goals that I want to hit, which I can't do when I'm like 100. Oh, I don't want to say can't do it when I'm 120 pounds, but it's just not. If I'm going to be 120 pounds and going for the Olympics, well, I probably shouldn't be trying to bench press, like 225 or like do all this.
That'd be impressive.
All this other stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. It seems like you made like the transition, instead of like you already experienced all you could in rowing, and like you experienced what it means to be great and be an Olympian, but now you're like moving towards a more like complex challenge, like in your life, or not challenge, but just like a more complex journey where you're going to learn more things, you're going to meet a lot more people, and like it's just a whole different life.
Yeah, that gets me excited, so like doing this kind of stuff, chatting to you guys, and can I like get a podcast going for the business, stuff like that. That's really fun.
So what's the startup that you're in? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I just joined a startup as head of marketing. It's inside the crypto real estate space. It's called Fabrica.land, and we're essentially putting like real land on the blockchain so that you can essentially buy and sell land as easy as people buy and sell NFTs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've been a follower of yours on Twitter for a while, and it's really cool all the things you've been building and what you've been doing in this space. But you mentioned how now you have time for all the other stuff, but maybe if you're going to be skiing, stay in the Olympics, so we keep another one of those off the slopes. But I guess so. One last like Olympic question. So how do you maintain like a mindset of just continuing to improve and get better each day, when especially like today, every day there's being more noise and distractions put out that are just like can distract you and stop you from achieving your goals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the funny thing is, and I think this is a podcast only, but I've got a bit of a tattoo on my arm, which I got in the 2016 season, after we didn't qualify for the Olympics. And the tattoo says, "The joy is in the doing." And for me, that really sums it all up, is that you're never going to be an Olympian if you don't like the sport you're in. And you're never going to be successful in business if you don't like the business you're in. You're not going to have a good podcast if you don't like podcasting. That doesn't mean it's easy, but you've actually got to like kind of key parts about it. So that was a big thing for me, where I was like, yeah, didn't make the Olympics in 2016, got really close, but missed out. And I was like, well, if my rowing career stopped today, would I be like really upset? Do I just throw out the last 8 to 9 years in this sport because the last race I didn't get me to the Olympics, or even this Olympics? Like, I was kind of retired and came back in, made it to the Olympics, and we didn't put the best race out there that I thought we could have. And do I walk away going, okay, this all sucked because we didn't get the result? And I go, no, because I like really actually enjoyed when I got myself into that mindset and said, hey, okay, this is something that I'm committing to. These are all the sacrifices that I'm happy to make. Then I can like really enjoy rowing. And at the same time, yeah, it's like every day we would come off the water from our first session and ESPN is on in our break room and it's like Tokyo Olympics canceled. And it's like, that was literally happening every 2 or 3 days. And we're like, well, we've got another session in 2 hours. Like, everyone's really tired, as you are, training as much as we did. And we're like, are we still going out? Because this happened last year and we didn't go out. We went home and, our city locked down. Is that going to happen now? So it comes down to, yeah, like at the end of the day, for the most part, we really liked kind of getting out there, and we liked pushing ourselves. We tricked our minds to being like, yeah, this is the number one thing, and I'm going to go to bed at 8:30 at night and wake up at 5. Rowers aren't morning people. Rowers become morning people. This isn't easy. Like, they're not just naturally, I mean, there's some talent and stuff to it, but yeah, it's like nobody likes getting up in the morning. Some people like it, but you have to just get in that mindset, because you're like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, I really do kind of love the sport. It's awesome to be out on the water with your mates, all in the pain cave, maybe hungover every now and then from a big session on the weekend. And you're like, oh man, this is brutal, but you're in it together and you're having a good time. So yeah, you've just got to, that's again, the trade-off is, yeah, you said it well, Sam. It's like, you do have to isolate and compartmentalize it all, because everyone is telling you the Olympics are going to be cancelled. Everyone's telling you you're not good enough to do this. Why are you here? You're not qualified. Yeah, they're not qualified. They're not doing it. But I was like, yeah, well, if I'm good, I'm good. If I'm not, I'm not. I tried. I turned up. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it for me. I'm not doing it for my coach. I'm not doing it for my parents. I'm doing this because I decided that I wanted to go to the Olympics, and this is going to be what it takes. And I'm going to be happy with that, with however it goes. And if they didn't hold Tokyo, then, I still could have probably lived with that.
Yeah, that's super insightful, man. Everything you just said, really, like, that's just so wise. And like, I feel like a great quote, like, I don't know who said it or whatever. It's like, if you're not enjoying the journey, you're not going to enjoy the destination. And like, that goes for like everything, whether it be like financial goals. If you're like, oh, I want to be a millionaire, if you're not enjoying like the steps it takes to get there and everything you have to do to be a millionaire or to be an Olympian or whatever goal you have, then once you get to that point, it's not just going to be like, oh, you're happy for the rest of your life. Like, you do really have to enjoy all the steps along the way. which you summarized great with everything you just said. You already mentioned some books that like were about like rowing. Do you have any like book recommendations like in general about either mindset or anything that might be valuable to us or our viewers?
Yeah, the two other books that I really enjoyed reading, one of them was called Defining Decade. I can't remember who the author was. I think that book does a really good job, especially if you, I guess it talks a lot about kind of people approaching their 20s, but it can really be used probably even earlier. I thought that was a cool book because it just talks about how you can kind of like stack these little decisions which have big ultimate um, outcomes, or like little decisions do actually on the long term kind of really change your destination. And the analogy of the book, so if you don't read it, this is kind of the big premise. Let's say you're flying from New York to the West Coast. At the start of the journey, you can deviate pretty, like a small 1 degree shift could have very minor consequences where you can still deviate and change destination. But towards the end of it, if you were headed towards Seattle and you're getting close to Seattle and all of a sudden you want to go to LA, you have to do a big shift to get that plane to LA. LA was always possible from the start, but it just took 1 degree shift at the start to get you towards LA. Now that you've been going towards Seattle, it's going to take, very many degrees. So the idea is there is like, I think it is helpful to like have a goal, not to be too specific, but you've got to get the plane kind of going in the right direction. And then you do have to kind of understand that it is harder to shift. And that's why I kind of even use the Olympics as a strategic way to break up kind of my trajectory, where I was actually working at a cannabis food and beverage company where we were making like the #1 cannabis drinks in the country. And I was meeting with CEOs of some of the biggest CPG retail brands that you and I consume every day. And I was just remembered, I was like, man, if I stay in this company any longer, food and beverage is going to be my life, because I'm meeting the top food and beverage CEOs in the US. And if I change industry, I'm going to start at the bottom. And I needed to, whether it's the humility, I was like, okay, I'd rather do that now and start at the bottom in something that I'm more excited about than food and beverage, because I just kind of like fell into that. So that's one book. The other book that I really like is by Cal Newport, and the book is called Be So Good They Can't Ignore You, or So Good They Can't Ignore You, or something. And they talk a lot about, well, he talks a lot about kind of what it takes to be successful, or what makes somebody feel valuable. And it comes down to like a couple of things like autonomy, competence, and curiosity, or something like that. And it's like, okay, if you've got those 3 things, or can see yourself moving forward in one of those 3 areas, you're going to enjoy it. And if you're not feeling autonomous, and if you're not feeling competent, and if you're not curious, then you're not going to succeed. So those are 2 of my more favorite books to recommend.
Yeah, those are awesome. I also read when you said Cal Newport, I thought you were about to say Deep Work, which is also another great book that he wrote.
Yeah, I've read that too.
Yeah, that's a wonderful one.
So we normally end all our podcasts with this question. So directed at you, what is one goal that you have in your career or personal life, and what steps are you working to achieve it?
Well, yeah, the boring ones would be kind of my like physical goals. Like I do want to bench 225. I want to also run a sub 3-hour marathon. Those goals are kind of conflicting to a bit for my trainer. And then to go back to something that you touched about on earlier, which I probably took a tiny bit for granted while I was on the crew team at UW, where it was so cool to have people my age that I really related to who are all in the same parts of journey in their life, really going towards a common goal that everyone was focused on and excited about that. And I was operating at this like, yeah, great level of peak performance that I like really enjoyed. And what's funny is when you like get into the workforce or whatever, and this is probably almost more relevant a couple of years ago, like I think it's super cool what you guys are doing and stuff like that. But that like shared friendship and like I think desire to like go to something and work with people towards that same thing as your number one goal is incredibly hard to find. Like at the even at the companies that I've been at now, it's like, yeah, we're all kind of like trying to like do this specific thing, but everyone's kind of there, I don't want to say 9 to 5, but that's their work life, and then they do have their personal life, and then they do have their hobbies, and some of them have kids, and it's like all of this stuff is going on. So for me, like finding and working with people that I really enjoy working with, like towards something, I don't know what that thing is, but I'm looking for it, is kind of my goal, is like, yeah, who are the people that I can do like cool shit with and that will get really excited about it and want to work on it every day. That's kind of my weird professional personal goal, is to keep finding and searching for that and building it.
Yeah, that's a great goal. You got community and like growth all in the same thing right there. That's a great goal, actually.
Nice.
We appreciate you coming on, man. We definitely would love to have you back and talk about your startup and what you do in crypto and whatnot. Me and Sam are both enthusiasts. I'm sure you've seen Sam's Twitter. He's pretty common.
we definitely want to have you back on and talk about Moon Juice and Fabrica Land. But for the listeners, you can find all of Stuart's links in the description. Definitely go check out what he's doing over there. Anything else?
Nope. We appreciate it.
Love it. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah, we definitely learned a lot. We appreciate it.